Hello, I'm Shelby Hagerdon. I'm an iHeart Scholar and senior at Wayne State College, and I'm double majoring in history and film production and theory. I also have minors in political science and geospatial technology. And I did my honors thesis on Hysteria, the representation of female malady from Victorian psychotherapy to modern film. Now there's one very specific thing that 19th century women's health and film has in common, and that is the absence of women within the room. And this, of course, has caused a great lack of communication and a strong presence of the male gaze in women's health, history, and film. But what exactly is hysteria? It comes from the ancient Greek word hysteron, which meant the movement of the uterus. Now this plays into the wandering womb theory. And this theory stated that the uterus was almost like a supernatural entity that could move about on its own accord. Symptoms included anxiety, menstruation, and high sex drives. And common cures were pregnancy, which was thought to fill the womb to keep the uterus from moving about, and scents. By placing various scents at the vaginal opening, it could attract or repel the uterus back in place. Now, 19th century hysteria, this expanded into psychotherapy, with psychologists such as Joseph Breuer and Sigmund Freud. This also included Charcot, which is featured in the background here. This print actually hung in Sigmund Freud's office in Vienna. He focused on hysteria, but treated it through hypnosis. Now this was just one of the treatments. Therapy, hypnosis, and other cures as well, some a little bit more dangerous than others, were used. Symptoms of this form of hysteria were low and high sex drives, anxiety, independent-mindedness, seizures, which were typically epileptic seizures that had been misdiagnosed, and mental illness, or what we would consider schizophrenia, depression, generalized anxiety, or PTSD. Now, all of this caused a great miscommunication and misunderstanding between men and women that we still see today. Now, why exactly did I choose hysteria? I first read about it while I was taking a course in 19th century Europe. I became more interested in medical history, specifically women's health and medicine. And as COVID-19 hit, I saw some disturbing trends within medicine that I really wanted to be able to bring to light. And this included women coming in and telling their doctors, hey, I have symptoms of COVID, and being dismissed for having anxiety. I also saw trends that showed women were not being adequately represented in film. And there were still side effects from this belief in hysteria that were still lingering today in modern film. So to better understand this, to better understand representation and these lingering effects, as well as the male gaze in film, I decided to make my own. I made Sigmund and Dora over the summer of 2020. And it focuses on the case of Dora, Freud's case of Dora. Now, this focuses on Ida Bauer, who was a young patient of Freud's. She was sexually harassed and was not believed by anyone except for Sigmund Freud. However, Freud's first question was, why did you simply not sleep with this man? Of course, he wanted to make sure that it played into his own ideas of Oedipal and Electra complexes, both of which have been largely dismissed. But many do not know much of anything about this case or about Ida Bauer, but they do know plenty about Freud. And I wanted to make her case and her story as accessible to the public as possible, since many do not have the same accessibility to research papers or to even learn about the case in the first place. I also wanted to tell a historical story of a woman diagnosed with hysteria, not using the male gaze. So I rebuilt the set version of Freud's office from Vienna. Here we can see Freud's actual office, a photograph of that. And then, of course, the set that I built as well. And here we see Dr. Mary Elliott, who created the costumes for the film. She did all of the research on European fashion from the year 1900, as well as Freud's own personal style, and handcrafted these pieces. I gathered as many period-accurate props as I could find as well, including many pieces that came out of my own family's home. Here I have photographs from Denmark from the late 1890s, as well as a photograph from Ottawa, Iowa as well, all from family members. I also studied Freud's handwriting to make the letters on the desk as accurate as possible. On the desk you can also see beer steins from Germany in the late 1890s, as well as a European cigar box and letters from Denmark from my family during the time as well. Now, to truly understand the male gaze in film, I studied multiple films, but the three major ones were The Virgin Suicides, Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and The Stepford Wives. Now, every woman in these films would have been considered hysterical, whether it is mentioned in the film or not by that term. So starting with The Virgin Suicides, directed in 1999 by Sofia Coppola, this is told from a male perspective of these sisters who are misunderstood by their own family and sheltered away, and misunderstood by the men who are telling the story, as they're telling it only through diary entries and whatever information they can gather. And even they admit that they will never be able to truly understand the girls. Portrait of a Lady on Fire, directed in 2019 by Celine Sciamma, really has no major male perspective in it. It's mostly women in the whole film. There's really only about 4 lines by men in it, and it's only at the beginning and the end. But there is always this overlooking tone of what is socially right and wrong. And of course, what is considered socially right and wrong is created and constructed by men. The Stepford Wives, directed in 1975 by Brian Forbes, focuses on man's creation of the ideal woman and of the ideal wife. So you see male control, and this creation of women into perfect wives makes them submissive and subservient and overtly sexualized as well. Anything else and any other form of the woman is considered hysterical or crazy. Speaking more specifically on Portrait of a Lady on Fire, as I mentioned before, directed and written by Celine Sciamma, with cinematography by Claire Mathan. Now, the cast is nearly all women, and told by women, and about the majority of the crew is also women. So this is definitely a female story. Now, Portrait of a Lady on Fire is incredibly important because it directly opposes the male gaze, and it does so by showing real feminine life. Now, this is directly opposing the male gaze in France during 1770 specifically, and it shows cultured, educated, independent women at the front line, including Marianne, who is making a living on her own as a painter, Eloise, a young woman who joins the convent to allow herself to be more independent as a woman. Eventually, she does have to come back after her sister kills herself to try to escape marriage, and she is forced into marriage herself then. Also, Sophie, a maid who makes her living on her own as well, and gets pregnant during the film and has an abortion. Now, abortion is a common subject within the film, as it was common during the time as well. Sophie herself has received multiple, and Marianne has also received at least one. Eloise, of course, asks for the abortion to be painted by Marianne, because this is Celine Sciamma's way of saying this is important and this is real life for women during the time. And it is her way of saying that if we want this real feminine life depicted, women need to depict it themselves. Sex is also a theme within the film, but it is sex between 2 women. So there is no power dynamic or obsession with sex like what we would see in The Virgin Suicides or in The Stepford Wives. There's also the importance of women's friendship as a theme within the film as well. And during this time and thereafter, you're seeing the idea of the separate spheres coming about. And these separate spheres were never truly separate because the women were always under the thumb of the male sphere, always serving that male sphere at all times. Now, this film has women in their own complete area. There are no men to serve within this film. So you see them working on their own, being together, women with other women. And this is incredibly important, as many of the films that I've talked about before separate these women to serve men, like with the Stepford Wives. So I kept this in mind as I was writing Sigmund and Dora, and as I was looking at the man's historical narrative. And I was very careful to portray just how history and women's stories have been rewritten by men through history. So as we watch this clip, look for the symbolism and the analysis by Freud as he takes apart Dora's dream and how he rewrites it a bit himself.
And I asked Dora to take the dream apart and tell me what occurs to her about it. She says,
Well, a few days ago, Papa had a quarrel with Mama about locking the dining room at night. You see, my brother's room has no door of its own leading out of the house. You have to access it through the dining room. Papa doesn't like my brother being locked in like that at night. He said it wouldn't do. Some mishap might happen in the night, which means we would have to go out.
And you saw your papa standing beside your bed in the dream then?
Yes, just like I saw Herr Zelenka.
Herr K. But continue. The dream?
When I first had the dream at the lake, Herr K was standing over me. But now in my dreams, Papa does. After Herr K, I asked Hepina.
Frau K.
I asked Frau K if there is a key to my bedroom. Then the next morning, on the second day, I locked myself in while I was getting dressed. Then in that afternoon, when I was going to lock myself in again to rest on the sofa, the key was missing. I'm sure that Herr K had removed it. On the following mornings, I would have to fear Herr K surprising me while I was getting dressed. So I'd have to dress very quickly.
But the dream.
Our house was on fire. My father was beside my bed and woke me. I dressed quickly. My mother wanted to save her jewel case, but my father said, I refuse to let myself and my 2 children be burnt for your jewel case. We hurried downstairs, and when we went outside, I awakened.
Of course, we know that the dream is never as simple as it seems. Her father had gifted a bracelet to her mother, which she rejected. But Herr K gave Dora a jewel box, which she accepted. In the dream, Dora has clearly replaced her mother with herself and placed her father in Herr K's position. The jewel box quite obviously symbolized her innocence. So, inform her that she was simply confirming how intense her love for him is.
My love for him is not intense.
Now, of course, in the clip, it seems that Freud is simply changing the names for anonymity, right? But there is more to it than that, specifically within his analysis at the end, which sees him try to manipulate Ida's story to better fit his own agenda. And we see Ida very upset at the end of this clip, saying, no, I do not have feelings for him. But it better suits Freud and the male historical agenda. So how did creating Sigmund and Dora impact me? I felt very passionately about telling this story, and it was very important to me because, and it came to be even more important to me during this process. If you look at the picture of us on set, you see, of course, Sigmund Freud there and all these women on set. And During the entire process, there were only 3 men ever on set, all of which were actors. So this was women creating this film to tell the story of a woman. And I wanted Ida's voice to be heard in this, as women's voices throughout all of history need to be heard. But this included her taking her voice back. So in this clip, pay attention to exactly how she does this, as she tells the story, and pay attention to the editing and the symbolism when we show the men that she is speaking of.
Well, I traveled quickly to the train station, and I asked nearly 100 times, "Where is the station? Where is the station?" And each person replied with 5 minutes. So I kept walking, and soon I found myself in a thick wood. I asked again, "Where's the station?"
Let me guess. 5 minutes.
No. He replied, 2.5 hours more. He offered to accompany me, but I refused and trudged on alone.
Now notice how when she tells the story, when the men are on screen, we only see their mouths, never their eyes. And this is because when they see her, they never truly see her. Their eyes never truly see who she is. They never understand what she is saying. But they do speak. And this is why they are portrayed as only mouths. But even only being mouths, we still never hear their voices. And that is because this is Ida's opportunity to tell her story, to take her voice back without the input of men. Of course, there was also another important lesson I took away while shooting this, and that was just how necessary this kind of film is and how unappreciated women's voices are. I've included a few quotes from men who contacted me during the creation of this film, and their opinions on women-made films and the story being told itself. This was taken from a discussion I had with a man about the film Hustlers, made in 2019. He makes the case that he should not have to go see this film because he is a man and this is not a story for men. He says that as a male moviegoer, the purple-pink poster for Hustlers screamed designed for females, and I never bothered looking into it. And keep in mind, he didn't want to see this film because of the pink color of the poster. It just didn't appeal to me. Is it great? Maybe to the crowd it is aimed at. Is it Best Picture, award-winning, life-changing great? Not even close from what I just watched in the trailer. Kardashian stripper's revenge. And being a big dumb male, yes, sexy women appeal to me. Personally, the stripper part repels me as I stay away from that. He then goes into a rant about the Kardashians. But based on a true story or not, looks like another male beatdown movie. Deserved or not, it just doesn't appeal to me as entertainment. Why should I, a typical man, go see a film that doesn't appeal to me at all? It looks like a very well-made film, just doesn't appeal to me at all. He completely dismisses the film because he believes that it was made specifically for women and not for men, and that a man can never appreciate a woman's story. But that's all women have had for thousands of years, is men's stories. I believe, yes, it is important to hear these other perspectives and to hear these other stories. And now these quotes I do not believe are coming out of a place of malice, but out of a place of criticism and misunderstanding as well that we still see within our communities. I posted, because I do appreciate constructive criticism, I posted the first clip from my film, just the introduction, and I received, not even 12 hours later, a man telling me how I needed to re-edit it to make a slow reveal of Freud. Now, of course, this film is not about Freud, but I can understand where he's coming from because most historical works and historical films focus around men and historical men. But in this clip, notice how the slow reveal is not on Freud and who it truly is slowly revealing, and why this may be confusing to a general film audience.
Dreaming, in short, is one of the devices we employ to circumvent repression, one of the main methods of what may be called indirect representation in the mind. The present fragment from the case history of the treatment of a girl with hysteria is intended to show how the interpretation of dreams comes into the work of analysis. At the same time, it offers me on occasion to present some of my views on the psychological processes and organic conditions leading to hysteria. Our patient, whom I shall call Dora from now on, was already showing symptoms when she was 8 years old. I first saw her in the summer of her 16th year when she was suffering coughing and hoarseness. And even then, I suggested psychological treatment. She returned to me at 18 by will of her father, after proposing to kill herself when suffering from a fainting fit.
So as you can see, the clip does not reveal Freud. It reveals Ida, because this is her story. But it makes sense to assume that if historical work would be based on a man, because that is what we are used to and we have grown accustomed to. And if we look at the statistics, it continues to make sense. Now, women accounted for 51% of moviegoers in 2018. But of the top 100 grossing films of 2019, women only represented 10.7% of directors, 19.4% of writers, a quarter of producers, and 70% of editors. Now, women are being included in the post-production, but in the pre-production, the planning process, and the storytelling process, they're absent. And this impacts, along with hysteria, along with that 19th century idea of women's health, it impacts our view of women's independence, women's health, and mental health as well. But film and art can reflect society. And if this is a true reflection of society, that really is quite sad. But it also has the ability to change society, creating more films that portray women in a fair light, not through a male gaze, but through a woman's gaze, through a human gaze. We can change this. And getting these numbers, so it's 50-50 in the room, is so important to make sure there is adequate representation. So we can change these views and can make positive impacts on these views. Women's stories are still undervalued in film and in history. So please, if you take anything away from this presentation, go watch a woman's story, read a historical woman's story, go see a women-produced film. Because changing these numbers and impacting these views is incredibly important as we evolve as a society. Thank you.